Hi, I'm in Carmen, Manitoba with Kim Brown, Provincial Weed Specialist of Manitoba Agriculture. She just finished a seminar here at the research facility on weed seedling identification. Kim, what are some of the characteristics that growers or agronomists should look for in terms of identifying the weeds in their field?
Well, it's important to know right now what you've got, because this is when we're scouting fields and some of our crops are planted and up, some aren't planted yet. So whether you're doing a pre-burn or whether you've waiting to do an in-crop, a post-emergent spraying, it's really important to know what weeds are there. Like, what are your driver weeds? What are you going after? Like, what do you have to control? Obviously, there's going to be way more than just one kind of weed out there. And so it's really important to know what they are. And it's very hard to identify weeds when they're really small. Lots of times when plants get big, we know what they are. We recognize them, we go, oh, I know what that is. But by then it's way too big and beyond control. So it's really important we have to know what weeds are when they're small, and that is a bit more difficult to try to identify exactly what they are.
Right. And what are some of the more trickier weeds to identify, especially when they're small, like you say they are?
The grasses, for some people, can be really hard. There's not a lot to look at in a grass, and so there's not a lot of different features. With broadleaf weeds, we have something called cotyledons. That's a seed leaf, and they're usually very different than the true leaves, and sometimes they're very distinctive in a really distinctive shape. And at least if you don't know the exact weed, you can kind of put it into a family and kind of get an idea what it is, maybe see some bigger ones, and then you know. But with grass weeds, you don't have a heck of a lot to look at. You only have a few features, but having said that, the grass weeds are very specific as to what features are there, and you just kind of have to know, the difference between green foxtail and barnyard grass, or between green and yellow foxtail, or between barnyard grass and wild oats, and that type of thing. And so they're a little trickier for some people, but once you know what you're looking for, there's actually not that much to know.
Okay. Now, during your seminar, you talked about the importance of staging of those weeds and how crop protection products might actually work on them better. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, if you look at your crop protection guide, which is Saskatchewan and Manitoba have the same guide, and so we have product pages in here that are a subset of the label. So the label is a legal document, and on that document it's going to tell you the rates that you use for different products and the staging of the weeds and the staging of the crop. So you want to make sure you're in the right crop staging for crop safety, for maximum crop safety, but you also have to make sure you're within the right weed staging for maximum efficacy. So you want that product to work as well as it can. And so normally, we run into trouble when our weeds get too big and we're trying to spray weeds that are too big. The products just can't work or don't work as well, and then we have weed escapes. So it's really important to get to know what your weeds are that you're going after and make sure that you're still in that right window of application. And that's very specific product by product, and you need to be consulting the product pages or the label itself to make sure you've got that right staging when you're going out to spray.
Right. And we're in the Carmen area, and I know about a week ago or less we were seeing significant rainfall. Is that going to be an issue for some farmers, you predict, especially when trying to get in to spray some of those weeds? Yeah,
so some of the weeds may be getting big already. I know right here on the farm we've had lamb's quarters up for a very long time, and we have some that is probably in the 6 to 8 leaf stage already, and that's really pushing the limit on how well you can control that weed. So if we've got a lot of that in a field before you get seeding or before you get back to seeding because of all the rain, you've got to have some type of a pre-burn product, because by the time you would seed a crop there and wait for the crop to come up so you could do a post-emergent spray, those are way too big and you're going to miss them. And you're just, it's not a fact that the product didn't work, it was just you were beyond staging and the weed is too big, you can't kill it. So right now, to know what the staging is, I predict with all of this rain and once we get some warm temperatures, we're just going to see an absolute flush of weed growth. And so for some of our crops that are up already, maybe we'll be getting closer to doing some post-emergent spraying, and just to make sure that we're still in that right staging when we get to that. And for other crops, I think a burn off is going to be really important to make sure those weeds don't get ahead of our crop, because it's still going to take a while for that newly seeded crop to come up and become competitive.
Right. Now, you had a particular challenge in there today. I think there were 72 different weeds that attendees were asked to identify if they could. You talked about the 20 top weeds in Manitoba. That I don't expect you to go through all of them now, but what are some of the top 5 or the ones that are moving up in prominence when it comes to what you're seeing out there?
Well, things that we always see are things like green and yellow foxtail. We always see red root pigweed. We always see wild buckwheat. We always see things like volunteer canola, volunteer wheat. Volunteer canola for a number of years now has been the number 3 weed weed in the province because it's a really good weed. It's a great crop, but it's also a really good weed. And so we've got those. Biennial wormwood, there are some weeds that are moving up. We're seeing more foxtail barley. We're seeing things like biennial wormwood. We're definitely seeing more kochia. So that, some of these weeds are a function of maybe some of the weather patterns that we've had in the last number of years. When we come out of these dry cycles, which we're not in anymore, but when we came out of the dry cycles, we see increasing salinity on some of the fields. And so we see more weeds that there are more of the saline tolerant weeds like kochia and foxtail barley take a bigger foothold into those crops. And then as we get into a wetter cycle, those salts that have come to the surface, they get pushed back down again, and those weeds are maybe not quite so prevalent. Kochia is a different beast though, because in addition to it being a weed that loves salinity, we have an awful lot of herbicide resistance in it now. So we know that it's increasing because of that. That's just a whole nother story about weeds and herbicide resistance.
Kim, what are some of the resources or tools that growers or agronomists can use in the field to identify weeds properly so they know how to deal with them?
Yeah, well, there's plant apps or plant identification apps. Some of them are free. Some of them you have to pay a subscription fee. I don't really use those because I know a fair bit of the weeds anyways. One thing that I do use all the time is Google Lens. If you have a really good picture of a weed and it's just a single weed, not a lot of busyness in the background, not a big clump of weeds, it has to be a fairly close-up picture, no body parts in the picture. If you actually look, you use Google Lens, when you do that, you'll see it tracing the picture, and sometimes it's pretty good. Like actually lots of times it gets you very close, or it gets you to the right family. It might not be exactly the right weed. Other times it is wildly inaccurate and it is not even close. But over time that will get better as there's more and more pictures of weeds in there. Google Lens is wonderful for insects if you can get a good picture. It's wonderful for flowers and trees because there's loads of pictures on the internet. Weeds, not as much, but it is a nice tool, and I always say try that. If you've got a picture and you've got enough service, then try that. I still use a lot of books. I have a lot of books. Some of the books aren't in print anymore. You can pick them up maybe at used bookstores if you're lucky enough to find them. Some of them do have like digital PDFs, so you could print them off in color, although some of the books are quite big, so that does get a bit cumbersome to be printing off big booklets in color. Right. But I do have a collection of books that I like, and I know that there's certain weeds in this book and certain weeds in that book where I can get a really good picture, a really good description. I like using all different kinds of tools, and over time, because it's my job, I know a fair bit, but over time, the agronomists and all the people working in the field, we know the major weeds. Right. Sometimes the one-offs or the oddball weeds, we don't know those, and those are a little harder to know. If I absolutely have to identify a weed and I don't know what it is, I actually dig it up and I grow it out. And the minute you grow it out, they're hard to know. If you don't know what it is when they're small, then you grow it out, and when it gets bigger and it starts to see flowers and structures, does it have pods? What are the flowers like? Once you see that, then a lot of times it's a lot easier to know when it's a bigger plant. So if you're able to do that for something that you're just not sure on and you really want to know what it is, I would do that and put it in a pot and put it in the garden, keep it wet, and just see what it turns into.
Great. Is there anything else you want to add from today's seminar that we didn't talk about?
No, I'm just really thankful that I have lots of help with this seminar. I have lots of my colleagues bring me weeds. You saw most of our weeds are in red solo cups,
right, yeah.
Or just little potting. We dig them up. We plan on planting them out and having them in the weed garden for our diagnostic school later on, that's in July, so that we can see them when they're bigger. But I have a lot of industry help from people in industry and from people at Crop Alliance and people from the chemical companies. Also, ACC helps me out as well with some of the weeds that they grow out that we don't have here, and so it's kind of a real community effort to put this day on. Our Weed Supervisors Association helps supply some weeds and also supply us with refreshments. So it's a nice community effort to do this, and we've been doing this for a number of years. We stopped during COVID, and now we're back doing it again, and I think it's a lot of fun.
Well, thanks for your time, Kim.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Thank you.